Interesting news on the economy from a week or three ago that, it was less than three, but in any case, that the U.S. economy has grown more than 3% in the last quarter at an annualized rate. This is consequential because decade over decade, 10-year period over 10-year period, starting in 1950, the decade of the 50s, we had annual growth in the 50s, the 60s, and the 70s. For a full 10 years, average growth well in excess of 3%. Then Reagan came into office in '81, did his giant tax cuts, dropped the top rate from 74% down to 25%, these giant tax breaks for wealthy people and for corporations. And we haven't hit 3% of decade-long growth since then. We just hit it for a quarter, but that's, that's kind of the exception that proves the rule. I mean, so why not go back to the tax policies we had before Reagan that gave us the strongest growth in the history of our nation? On the line with us is Joe Messina. He's the host of The Real Side with Joe Messina. TheRealSide.com is the website. You can tweet him at TheRealSide. Joe, welcome back to the program. Joe? No Joe. Joe?
I'm here.
Hey, there you are. Okay. Sorry about that. So
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I hear you now. Yes. So why should we not learn from the lessons of history? Why do you want us to keep repeating the mistakes of the Reagan era?
Well, I don't know. I'm listening to the numbers that you're throwing out there, and I'm not an economic expert. I can barely balance my own checkbook, and I've had a few businesses in my time. But the New York Times kind of doesn't agree with you. They say under Barack Obama we had a 1.2% annual GDP growth. Under, let's see, Gerald Ford it was 2.2, but under Jimmy Carter it was 3.2. Ronald Reagan was 3.5. So, I guess the numbers go where you want them to go, depending on what side you're looking at.
I'm talking decades. You're talking presidential terms, and
yeah,
there are differences.
Top, doesn't it? I mean,
but the reality is that we haven't had a full decade of 3% growth since 1979.
For the whole decade, you're probably right. But do I want to go back to, you're saying you want to go back to pre-Reaganomics?
Yeah, I'm saying Reaganomics screwed the country. Reaganomics screwed the middle class. We haven't seen growth in average working people's wages. In fact, while household income has gone up in the last 30 years, it's gone up largely because we've gone from 1.2 workers in a household to over 2 workers in a household. Now it's not just mom and dad working, they got the kids working too in order to support the household. So household income is all the way up to, in the high 40s. But individual income is still in the 20s. So individual income has not moved in 30 years. Reagan put a stop to that, just full stop, between his war on labor and his tax policy.
What you're saying then is, because of Reagan's policies, we haven't been able to move the needle for 30 years.
Yes, that's what I'm saying.
Is that the contention here?
Actually, no. Actually, what I'm saying is the needle has been moving in the wrong direction. For 30 years, $7.1 trillion has moved out of the pockets of the middle class and into the pockets of the top 1%. When my dad retired about a decade ago, or maybe a decade and a half ago, at 65 from 40 years in a tool and die shop, he owned his house, he had a pension, he had Social Security, he was doing just great, right? And his car was paid off and everything. That does not happen by and large anymore. Middle class wealth like that is wiped out by Reaganomics.
Well, again, you're blaming it all on one process, on one president. You've had 2 presidents that's been able to change it, whether it's Mr. Clinton and Mr. Obama. Both of them had opportunities to change that.
And they failed to.
They didn't figure it out. But wait a minute. Let me kind of answer your question. You get into Obama and you look at the jobless rate, or not the jobless rate. You look where people were at. When you look at people that were suffering under poverty, that went up. What happened to those economic changes that Mr. Obama made? They didn't seem to help at all.
That's my point. Obama did not raise taxes back to where they were before Reagan came into office. I mean, we could point out, and I think it's probably important to point out that
are you suggesting, though, again, that raising taxes is going to put more people back to work?
Yes, I am. And in addition to that, I'm saying that if you're going to make statements about the Obama administration, you have to preface them by acknowledging that George W. Bush and the Republican Party and their deregulation of the late 90s led to the largest crash since the Great Depression, one of the worst recessions in American history. And again, Republicans want to repeat that too. So yes,
Well,
I'm absolutely saying that. I'm saying that if rich people had less money to stick in their offshore checking accounts, and therefore there was more money in the pockets of working people, that those working people would spend that money, and that creates demand, and that's what drives economies.
No, my contention is when people have more money, yeah, they do spend more money. I've had businesses where I had people working for me. But let's get back to what you said a second ago. When you talk about what went on, whether it's under Obama, Reagan, any president, right? You've got to stimulate the economy, get people out working, willing to spend money.
But Joe, that's not true of rich people.
What?
That's not true of rich people. If you've got, I guarantee you that, you get some Wall Street billionaire who's making $1 billion a year on Wall Street. If they start making $500 million a year instead of $1 billion, they're not going to work half as many hours. Or if they start making $2 billion, they're not going to work twice as many. And besides that, twice as many for $1 billion, really? Rich people have everything they want. They just put more money in their savings accounts.
We blame that top 1%. They're not going to go out and spend money. They're making more money or what have you. But if they're so cheap, if they're so squeaky, if they won't give up the money, then what makes you think they're going to hire anybody if they're paying more taxes? I had 19 people working for me at one point in time, and in another business I had. And I got to tell you something. They were out. They needed things. When they got raises, they bought more things. When I didn't have to pay as much in taxes or I got more revenue in, I hired more people. It all
right. You are not describing the experience of the top 1% in America. You're describing the experience of an entrepreneur. And I've had that experience too. And the reality is that the people, that those 19 people you hired, I'm willing to bet, Joe, that not a single one of them did you hire because you could afford to. That instead you hired all of them in order to meet the demands of the marketplace. And the demands of the marketplace, aggregate demand, Econ 101, aggregate demand is over 90% of aggregate demand is comprised of wages. So if you want to increase, if you want to stimulate an economy, raise wages like Eisenhower did, like Lyndon Johnson did, like Jack Kennedy did. Raise wages.
Right. So the companies I was doing work for, they made capital investments when they made more money. They upgraded equipment when they made more money because I was in the computer world. And when they would need more, when they had to have more, when they had to do more work for them, we had to hire more people to come in and do that work.
Right. You're making my point. You've got, if you're going to grow your company, you have to remain competitive. I'm not disputing that. What I'm saying is that if you think that companies are going to change their behavior, non-financial services companies are going to change their behavior as a result of tax cuts, you're believing in something that has never been demonstrated to be true. Or at least if they're going to change their behavior in a way that works to the advantage of working people in America. In fact, the opposite is true. Every time wealthy people in this country get more power and more tax breaks, and I would say look at the 1920s, look at the Harding, Coolidge, and Hoover administrations for great examples of this, what they did with that money is screw their workers. You're talking about the upper 1% of these businesses. Yes, these are the people that Paul Ryan wants to give tax cuts to. These are the people that Donald Trump is one of. He wants to give tax cuts to himself. He wants to do away with the alternative minimum tax, cut his own taxes by $25 million a year.
All right. So then the movement made by again, people in your party, whether it be Obama, Clinton, or what have you, all of those, when the 1% got richer, was that okay? Were you against what they were doing?
I'm simply saying that the tax policy that we had before Reagan came in with these obscene and absurd ideas, that if you give more money to rich people, somehow that's going to make poor people less poor, is nonsense. Joe Messina, therealside.com is the website. You can tweet him at TheRealSide or at Joe Messina, Messina. Thanks, Joe.